Welcome. Tonight, you'll embark on a quiet journey to ancient Egypt. This is a story of a man whose hands helped shape one of the greatest wonders of the world. As the sun rises for the last time over his labor, you'll walk with him, feel his thoughts, and witness his final day as a builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let your mind rest. Let the sounds of ancient sands guide you into deep sleep. The morning sun slowly rose over the vast desert, casting a golden glow across the endless sea of sand. The distant silhouette of the Great Pyramid loomed against the sky, its unfinished peak cutting through the warm haze. Dust floated lazily in the air, swirling with every breath of wind, settling over the linen robes of men who had gathered long before dawn. Among them stood Mena, a seasoned worker whose hands were as worn as the limestone blocks he helped shape. Mena had worked on this monument for years, watching it rise stone by stone. He had memorized the grooves of every tool, the rhythmic thud of wooden mallets, the rough scratch of copper chisels against stone. But today was different. Today was his last day. His family awaited him in a small village beyond the Nile. His children had grown without truly knowing their father's face beneath the dust, and his wife's letters, delivered by merchants and friends, always ended with the same longing words, "Come home soon." Walking toward the quarry, Mena's sandals crunched over the gravel path. Workers greeted him with nods, some with tired smiles. He passed rows of men hauling ropes, their muscles straining under the weight of massive stone sledges dragged over wet sand to reduce friction. The murmurs of chants rose, ancient rhythms designed not only to coordinate movement, but to bind spirits together. He paused at the foot of the ramp, a massive incline stretching toward the half-completed pyramid. Oxen strained against their harnesses, helping guide sledges laden with limestone blocks. Supervisors barked orders, their voices nearly drowned by the cacophony of effort. The air smelled of sweat, wet sand, wood, and sun-baked rock. Mena's task today was familiar, yet meaningful, preparing the stones for the outer casing. Unlike the rough core blocks, these were polished, smooth, destined to shine beneath the Egyptian sun for eternity. It was said that once finished, the pyramid would reflect Ra's divine light, so brightly it could be seen for miles. He reached for his copper chisel, the same one he had sharpened countless times. His fingers traced its worn handle, a companion through the years. Beside him, a younger worker, barely old enough to grow a beard, struggled with a misaligned block. "Steady," Mena advised, kneeling. "Feel the stone. Let it tell you where it wants to break." The boy nodded, copying his movements. Together, they tapped, adjusted, and smoothed until the harsh edge gave way to a perfect line. The hours melted beneath the relentless sun. Shadows shortened, then lengthened again. Each swing of the mallet echoed Mena's memories. His first day here, when the pyramid was but a foundation. He recalled friendships forged, accidents survived, even the solemn funerals when workers were lost in misfortune. As midday approached, he climbed higher onto the scaffold. From this vantage point, he could see the Nile glistening like a silver ribbon, fields stretching green beyond its banks. Boats drifted lazily along the water, their sails catching the wind, oblivious of the toil on the sands. For a brief moment, Mena allowed himself pride. This monument would stand long after his bones turned to dust, long after names of kings faded. The stones would remember the hands that placed them, but the day was far from over. The foreman's shout snapped him back to the present. "Mena, Block 22 is cracking. Take your team." Wiping his brow, Mena descended, ready to guide one final repair before the sun dipped behind the western dunes. Mena hurried toward the damaged block. His feet moved instinctively over the labyrinth of ramps, scaffolding, and stone paths that twisted around the pyramid's colossal body. Block 22 lay at the western base, a massive limestone slab showing a deep fracture down one edge. Four workers stood around it, brows furrowed, unsure whether to attempt a repair or replace it entirely. He knelt beside it, fingers brushing over the crack, feeling its depth. "Its surface deep," he concluded after a moment. "We can patch this." His voice carried both confidence and calm, a tone earned by years of labor under the punishing sun. "Fetch more gypsum mortar," he instructed one man. "You," he pointed to another, "bring the copper wedges." The young apprentice from earlier hovered nearby, watching every move, eager to learn. Mena motioned for him to help. "You'll do the smoothing. Watch closely." The apprentice nodded quickly, grabbing a flat stone tool and kneeling by Mena's side. Together, they worked in harmony, filling the crack with mortar and reinforcing it with carefully driven wedges. Each motion was methodical, years of muscle memory guiding hands that rarely erred. As they labored, the sounds of construction hummed around them. Whistles of overseers, chants of haulers, rhythmic pounding of sledges moving stone over wetted sand paths. Farther away, a team mixed copper smelt, pouring molten metal to craft new chisels, the sharp smell of burning wood and metal filling the air. Above, seagulls wheeled in the brilliant sky, drifting between thin clouds that offered no shade. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, but Mena hardly noticed anymore. His skin was leathered by years beneath it. His body adapted to the rhythm of heat, sweat, and dust. As the crack was sealed, he sat back for a moment, letting his gaze drift toward the rising pyramid. Scaffolds lined its face like the skeleton of some great beast. Ramps spiraled upward, dotted with men hauling blocks in endless lines. Near the peak, stonemasons polished the white casing stones, the future skin of the pyramid that would gleam so bright it would blind those who looked upon it from a distance. Mena remembered when there was nothing but sand here, when the first foundation trench was dug. He remembered doubters, those who whispered this project would never finish, that it was a folly of kings. Yet now, years later, the shape stood undeniable, a mountain made not by nature but by human hands. His hands. A messenger boy ran past, clutching a clay tablet scrawled with symbols. "Message to the foreman," the boy called, disappearing into the maze of ramps. Mena rose slowly. His knees ached, a dull, familiar pain that came with each passing year. Yet today, it felt heavier, weighted by the knowledge that this would be the last time he would rise from this place as a worker of the pyramid. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. "Mena," a voice called. It was the foreman again. "They need help at the hall near the eastern side." One of the sledges tipped. Without hesitation, he grabbed his tools, slung his bag over his shoulder, and started toward the east, his sandals kicking up little clouds of dust. His breath steady, his step certain. This was his last day, but it would be a day remembered. Mena moved swiftly across the construction site, navigating between rows of workers straining under the weight of ropes and wooden beams. The eastern side was a hive of chaos. A sledge carrying an enormous limestone block had veered off the wetted path, its runners caught in the dry sand, sending the load tilting dangerously to one side. Several men stood nearby, hands on hips, debating whether to attempt to right it or dismantle it altogether. "Move aside." Mena instructed with the authority of someone whose experience spoke louder than titles. "We can salvage this." The ropes strained like taut snakes, groaning under the tension. Mena crouched, inspecting the grooves where the sledge had dug deep into the sand. Nearby, buckets of water sat half-spilled. An effort to wet the sand and reduce friction had failed when the water ran dry faster than expected. "Bring more water." "2 buckets," he instructed sharply. "And we'll need logs to wedge beneath the front." The workers sprang into motion. Mena's hands gripped the edge of the sledge, fingers pressing into the splintered wood as he visualized the solution. Years of experience had taught him to see movement before it happened, to understand how wood, stone, and sand interacted. As the water was poured and logs placed beneath the runners, Mena gave the signal. A dozen men pulled the ropes in unison, grunting under the strain. The sledge shifted, groaning, threatening to tip, but then with a deep scrape, it slid back onto the track. Cheers erupted. A small victory in a day filled with them. "Good work." Mena nodded to the men, clapping one on the back. "Now, get it moving before the sand dries again." As the sledge continued toward the ramp, Mena allowed himself a brief moment to lean against a nearby scaffold pole, watching the endless flow of labor. The construction of the pyramid was a living thing, a heartbeat of humanity expressed through motion, effort, and will. He glanced toward the central plaza, where the scribes worked. Tall stone tablets stood there, etched with progress records, lists of rations, workers' names, and shipments of copper, wood, and stone. Somewhere in that organized chaos was a record of his years spent here. His name immortalized not in the stone of the pyramid itself, but in the ink and symbols that tracked the efforts of those who built it. The thought gave him pause. Would the kings remember the names of men like him? Or would time swallow them, as the desert swallowed footprints? He turned toward the storage area to retrieve new chisels. His old one was wearing thin, the copper edge dented and curled from repeated use. The storage master, an elderly man with a single cloudy eye, greeted him with a tired nod. "End of the line, Su Mena?" the man asked, passing him a freshly smelted chisel. Mena chuckled softly. "That's right, one more sunset." The storage master grinned, revealing teeth stained by years of chewing herbs. "Then make it a good one." As Mena walked back toward the northern ramp, chisel in hand, his gaze lifted again to the pyramid's peak. Workers were assembling scaffolding for the final layers. The end was near, not just for him, but for the monument itself. The air shifted. A breeze swept across the desert, stirring dust into spirals. Mena closed his eyes briefly, letting the wind cool his sweat-dampened skin. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with a familiar scent of sand, stone, and effort. This was his world. It always had been. But tomorrow, it would belong to others. The northern ramp was one of the most treacherous sections of the construction site. Steeper than the others, it led directly toward the upper courses where the outer casing stones were being positioned, smooth, white limestone designed to gleam beneath the relentless Egyptian sun. Mena's legs burned as he ascended, but the ache was familiar, almost comforting. With every step, memories surfaced. He remembered when the first rows were laid, how the foundation stones had to be perfectly level lest the entire structure lean and collapse. He had been part of that team, one of the first to touch the earth where the pyramid now stood. At the top of the ramp, a team struggled with a stubborn block that refused to settle flush against its neighbors. The stone jutted at a slight angle, threatening precision of the entire course. The foreman was red-faced, barking at the workers. If it's not perfect, the whole casing will collapse. Mena stepped forward. "Let me?" The foreman, recognizing him, stepped aside without a word. Kneeling, Mena ran his hands over the stone surface, feeling the imperfections invisible to the eye. Years of practice had trained his senses beyond simple sight. His fingertips detected minute dips, tiny rises, the subtle grain of the limestone. "Here," he murmured, pointing to a raised spot. "It's pressing here. It needs shaving." He gestured to the apprentice, who quickly fetched a polishing stone and copper tools. Together, they ground away the excess, smoothing the surface until blocks slid perfectly into place with a satisfying, muted thud. A quiet cheer rose from the nearby workers. Even the foreman, who rarely offered praise, nodded approvingly. "Still the best hands in Giza," he muttered. Mena smiled faintly but said nothing. His satisfaction wasn't in the praise. It was in the precision, the knowledge that his hands had made something that would outlast him by centuries, perhaps millennia. The days stretched on. Load after load arrived, and with each one, the pyramid grew closer to completion. The sun began its slow descent, turning the desert sky from pale blue to molten gold. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the wind grew cooler. Mena took a moment to rest on a scaffold beam, watching as the light shifted. From this height, the Nile was a thin, shimmering line. Fields of green flanked its edges, broken by clusters of mud brick homes and the occasional fishing boat drifting lazily downstream. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think beyond the pyramid. He imagined walking those fields again, hearing his children's laughter, sitting beside his wife beneath the shade of their fig tree. The thought felt strange, foreign yet familiar, like remembering a dream after waking. Nearby, the apprentice sat beside him, chewing a strip of dried figure. "Is it strange?" the boy asked suddenly. "Leaving?" Mena didn't answer immediately. He watched the horizon, then said quietly, "It is." This place has been my life. Every stone, every mark, it's part of me now. The boy nodded but didn't fully understand. How could he? His journey was just beginning. A bell rang, a signal for the final haul of the day. Mena stood, stretching his stiff back. "Come," he said to the boy. "Let's finish strong." Together, they descended the ramp, returning to the heart of the construction site for one last task before the desert swallowed the sun entirely. The main yard buzzed with a familiar end-of-day urgency. Workers hurried to complete their assigned tasks before the overseers signaled the final horn. Despite the fatigue that weighed on every shoulder, there was a collective determination, a silent agreement that no stone would be left unattended, no task unfinished. Mena made his way toward the tool repair station, where sparks flew from hammers striking copper blades. The rhythmic clang echoed across the site, mixing with the grunts of men hauling, cutting, and polishing. He handed his worn chisel to the smith, who examined it with a knowing glance. "End of life," the smith muttered, turning it in his hands. "Like many of us." Mena chuckled softly. "Make it sharp enough for one more sunset." The smith nodded, tossing it into a furnace where the dull metal would be reborn, at least temporarily. While waiting, Mena wandered toward the alignment platform, a flat expanse where surveyors used plumb lines and star charts to ensure the pyramid's perfect angles. A young surveyor adjusted a sighting instrument, his brows furrowed in concentration. "You're still chasing the stars?" Mena asked with a grin. The boy looked up, startled, then smiled. "Always. Without them, this would be crooked as a drunk staff." Mena laughed, patting his shoulder. "Then may the stars be kind." Nearby, oxen groaned under the strain of pulling sledges loaded with the final blocks of the day. Mena joined a crew, helping guide one of the massive stones up the southern ramp. They shouted in unison, feet digging into the sand, muscles straining against the ropes. The block slid reluctantly, fighting gravity, but inch by inch, it surrendered to the will of men. Halfway up, one of the ropes snapped with sharp, cracking sound. The block jolted dangerously, threatening to slide backward. Panic rippled through the crew. Men scrambled, some diving out of the way. Mena reacted instinctively. He grabbed a support wedge, jamming it beneath the sledge runner before the block could gain dangerous speed. Others followed his lead, hammering wedges and adding backup ropes. Breathless tension hung in the air until the load finally stabilized. Silence, then laughter, nervous, relieved. "You've saved it, old man." One worker gasped, clapping Mena's back. Mena grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Not old yet, just well practiced. The final haul resumed, slower now, but steady. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with bands of orange, pink, and deep purple. The desert transformed beneath the twilight, its harsh edges softened, the dunes glowing like gold dust. As the sledge reached the upper platform, Mena lingered for a moment, letting his gaze travel across the sprawling site. Workers bustled below like ants. Scaffolds framed the massive structure, and smoke curled from the forges and cook fires. His eyes lifted to the very top, the unfinished capstone that, when placed, would signify the pyramid's completion. He wouldn't be here to see that. Someone else's hands would finish what has had helped begin. And that, he realized, was as it should be. A deep horn sounded across the sands, the final signal of the day. Tools were downed, ropes coiled, and men began their descent toward the rest quarters. The day was nearly done. His last day, almost complete. The horn's echoes faded into the vastness of the desert, leaving behind a strange, almost sacred quiet. It wasn't silence. There were still murmurs, footsteps, and the distant bleating of goats in the worker camps. But it was a quieter rhythm now, one of closure, of ending. Mena descended the ramp slowly, savoring every step. His knees ached more than usual, his calves stiff from the endless climbing and hauling, but he welcomed the ache. It was a familiar companion, as much a part of this place as the stone and sand. Passing by the water station, he dipped the clay ladle into the cool basin, letting the water run over his hands before sipping. The sharp contrast of cold against sunburned skin was both relief and reminder. This was a place of extremes. Heat and cold, hardship and pride, pain and beauty. Near the shade of a wooden canopy, a group of workers gathered around a fire pit, sharing flatbread and figs. Laughter drifted from them, mingled with teasing insults and exaggerated stories of the day's near disasters. Someone was recounting the snap rope incident from earlier, gesturing wildly to demonstrate how the block had nearly crushed 3 men. Mena smiled, shaking his head. By tomorrow, they'll say the whole pyramid nearly collapsed, he muttered to himself. He continued past them toward the foreman's quarters. The foreman, an older man named KB, stood outside with clay tablet in hand, checking off names and tasks with reed stylus. "You're still breathing, I see," KB remarked without looking up. "Barely," Mena replied. "One more sunset, like we agreed." KB finally looked at him, his stern features softening just slightly. "It won't be the same without you here." Mena shrugged. "The stones won't care." "Maybe not," KB said, "but the men will." A brief silence passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of years shared beneath this brutal sun, of labors endured, of tasks completed side by side. KB tapped the tablet. "If you've any unfinished business, best tend to it. Tomorrow, you'll be on the river before dawn." Mena nodded. "I know." He turned away, wandering not toward the workers' barracks, but toward the western edge of the site. Here, beyond the main construction area, lay the quarry pits, the source of countless tons of limestone, each block cut by hand, shaped by sweat, blood, and relentless time. The pits were quieter now. Most of the day's work was done. A few stragglers chipped at the last assigned stones, their tools sending soft echoes into the descending twilight. Mena walked the edge of the nearest pit, tracing the grooves left by sledges and carts over the years. How many stones had he helped move from this earth to that rising monument? How many times had he cursed the weight, the heat, the endless repetition? And yet, standing here, he felt none of the bitterness that had sometimes filled him in his younger days. Only a strange, bittersweet pride. He crouched, picking up a palm-sized chunk of limestone that had broken from a larger slab. Its surface was rough, but flecked with veins of white, evidence of its destined purpose. Pocketing the stone, he whispered, "A piece to remember." As the sun finally dipped below the western dunes, casting the pyramid in deep shadow, Mena stood, breathing in the cooling air. Tomorrow, his feet would touch the soft grass of home for the first time in years. But tonight, he was still part of the pyramid. The sky deepened from amber to indigo, stars beginning to pierce through the fading veil of dusk. The desert's oppressive heat softened quickly, replaced by a crisp chill that wrapped itself around Mena's shoulders. He pulled his linen shawl tighter, walking slowly toward the worker camps beyond the pyramid's shadow. Fires dotted the camps, their orange glow flickering against the silhouettes of tents and mud brick shelters. The smell of roasting barley, lentils, and fresh bread mingled with the earthy scent of desert dust. Mena's stomach grumbled, a reminder that despite the weight of his thoughts, his body still belonged to simple needs. As he approached his usual spot, a flat stone beside one of the larger fires, several familiar faces greeted him with nods and half-smiles. These were men who had shared this life with him for years. Some he'd known since the first foundation trench was dug. Others were younger, fresh-faced, still wide-eyed at the sheer scale of what they were building. "Will you finally tell the story?" one asked, grinning, passing Mena a chunk of bread. Mena arched an eyebrow. "What story?" "You know, the real reason you're leaving. Found a gold mine? Marrying a queen?" Laughter rippled through the group. Mena chuckled, biting into the bread. "No gold, no queens, just time." A quiet settled then, not awkward, but thoughtful. They all understood. Time was a heavier weight than any block of stone. Someone poured him a cup of fermented beer. Thick, cloudy, slightly sour. He accepted it with a nod, letting the warm liquid ease down his throat, spreading comfort from chest to limbs. As the meal continued, the younger workers asked questions. Endless questions. What was the hardest part? Did you ever think it wouldn't stand? Were you there when the first stone was placed? Mena answered patiently. The hardest part? He considered. Patience. Learning that the work is bigger than you, that it may never finish in your lifetime, but that doesn't matter. They listened, silent now, watching the firelight dance across his weathered face. The first stone, he continued, voice softer, wasn't the hardest. It was the 10th, the 100th, the 1000th. That's when doubt creeps in. When you realize how small you are compared to what you're building. One of the older men nodded, murmuring, "And yet, here it stands." A silence followed, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the distant hum of night insects emerging from the sands. Mena leaned back, eyes lifted to the stars. Orion's belt hung low on the horizon, a constellation sacred to their people, said to mirror the 3 Great Pyramids themselves. He wondered if someday someone would look at these stones and think of the stars, or if they'd forget entirely that it was hands like his that placed them here. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, moored himself into the others, "I go home." The words felt strange, heavy, yet somehow right. As the fire burned lower, one by one the others drifted off, some to their tents, others to the open sand where they would sleep beneath the sky. Mena remained a while longer, watching the embers glow, listening to the wind shift over the dunes. Tonight was his last night beneath the pyramid's gaze. Tomorrow, the river would carry him back to a life he had almost forgotten, but for now, he was still part of the monument, a stone among stones. The chill of the desert night deepened as Mena finally rose from his seat by the fire. His limbs felt heavier than usual, not from fatigue alone, but from the weight of realization that this chapter of his life was closing. Slowly, he walked toward the edge of the camp where his modest belongings were packed, a woven satchel containing his few possessions, simple linen garments, a clay amulet shaped like the Eye of Horus, and a small chunk of limestone he'd taken from the quarry earlier that evening. He sat beside his bundle, gazing once more at the silhouette of the Great Pyramid against the star-filled sky. Its edges were softened now by the darkness, appearing more like a mountain crafted by the hands of gods than by men. From this distance, he could see the glow of the night fires scattered across the construction site. The forge fires, the watch fires, the torches lining the ramps where a few night crews worked under the stars. Even now, the pyramid did not sleep. It breathed, it pulsed with human effort, as if it were a living being. His thoughts drifted to the Nile, whose dark ribbon he would follow at dawn. He imagined the gentle rocking of the boat, the cool spray of water, the sudden shift from desert dust to the lush green of riverbanks. He could almost hear the laughter of his children, smell the bread baking in his home, feel the softness of his wife's hands. Things that seemed like memories of another life until now. And yet, a strange hesitation lingered in his chest. For so long, the pyramid had been his world. Each stone had carried a part of his life. Every block set, every rope pulled, every scaffold climbed had been a measure of time passing. How did one simply walk away from something like that? Footsteps approached from behind. He turned to see the young apprentice, the boy who had shadowed him throughout the day, carrying a small bundle. "I brought you something," the boy said quietly, sitting beside him. From the bundle, he revealed a polished piece of white casing stone, smooth and cool to the touch. "It's from today's last shipment. I thought maybe you should have it." Mena took it carefully, running his fingers over the flawless surface. It was perfect, no cracks, no flaws. The kind of stone that would one day face the sun, shining so brightly it could be seen for miles. "Thank you," Mena said softly, his voice rougher than he intended. This means more than you know." The boy hesitated, then asked, Do you think they'll remember us? The ones who built it." Mena was silent for a long time. Then he nodded, staring at the pyramid. "Maybe not by name, but they'll remember this. They'll remember that it stands, that it endured, and that is enough." The boy nodded, absorbing the weight of those words, then stood. "I should go. Early haul tomorrow." Mena watched him walk away, disappearing into shadows between tents. A flicker of pride stirred in his chest. The future belonged to hands like his now. As the last embers of the campfires died and the desert slipped fully into darkness, Mena lay back on the sand, staring up at the constellations. The sands were cool beneath him, the air crisp. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of stone, dust, and distant water. Tomorrow, the river would carry him home. But tonight, The pyramid watched over him one last time. The first light of dawn crept softly over the eastern horizon, casting long, delicate beams that kissed the tops of the scaffolds and illuminated the highest points of the pyramid. The desert stirred quietly, not with the thunder of daytime labor, but with the gentle sounds of awakening. The soft shuffle of sand under feet, the distant murmur of workers rising, the flap of linen tent doors against the morning breeze. Mena sat up slowly, feeling the coolness of the sand giving way to the first touches of warmth. His satchel was already packed. His hands brushed instinctively over the polished casing stone gifted by the boy and the rougher chunk of limestone from the quarry. Two symbols of his years here. Two pieces of a monument that would stand long after the wind had erased his footprints from the desert. A bell chimed from the direction of the river, a signal that the transport boats were preparing to depart. Mena stood, brushing the dust from his robes, and took one last slow look at the silhouette of the pyramid rising behind him. In the gentle morning light, its edges gleamed, soft yet imposing, as though the very bones of the earth had risen to touch the sky. "Time," he murmured. His steps toward the river were measured, deliberate. Each footfall echoed, not just across the sand, but deep inside his chest. He passed the rows of morning workers gathering tools, preparing the first hauls of the day. Some recognized him, offering brief nods or simple waves, acknowledgments not just his presence, but his departure. "Safe travels, Mena. You've earned your rest. Tell your family the pyramid misses you." Their voices floated around him, warm but tinged with something deeper. Respect, perhaps even reverence. At the edge of the encampment, the foreman KB stood waiting, arms crossed over his chest, a crooked smile hidden beneath his heavy beard. "Didn't think you'd really leave," KB said as Mena approached. Mena chuckled. "Neither did I." KB extended a hand, not the formality of superior to a worker, but the grip of one equal to another. Mena took it firmly. "You'll always have a place here," KB added. "The pyramid doesn't forget its builders." Mena nodded. "Nor do I forget her." They parted with that. No grand speeches, no ceremony, just the quiet dignity of men who had spent years shaping stone and time. As Mena continued toward the riverbank, the Nile came into view. Its surface sparkled beneath the morning sun, reflecting the sky in ripples of silver and blue. Boats were moored along the shore, flat-decked vessels with broad sails and wooden frames, their crews loading bundles of goods, pottery, and supplies. The boatman, a wiry man with skin as dark as oiled wood, greeted Mena with a nod. "Southbound." Mena nodded, stepping onto the deck. "Home." The boat rocked gently as he settled into a seat near the bow. Others climbed aboard, merchants, messengers, a handful of workers on leave. The boatman shouted a command, and with a heave, the vessel pushed away from the bank, its sail catching the morning breeze. As the boat drifted into the current, Mena turned for one last look. The pyramid stood against the backdrop of the desert, framed by the soft glow of sunrise. Its silhouette was perfect, unwavering. Even from a distance, it radiated something more than mere stone. It carried the weight of generations, the echo of hands like his. He watched until the shape blurred into the horizon, until the edges softened, until only memory remained. Then, with a deep breath, Mena turned his gaze forward, toward the river, toward home. The boat glided smoothly along the Nile, the gentle push of the current and the whisper of wind against the sails blending into a steady, soothing rhythm. Mena leaned against the wooden railing, watching the shoreline drift by. Palm trees lined the edges of the river, their fronds swaying lazily in the breeze. Beyond them, fields stretched green and gold, dotted with farmers tending to wheat, barley, and flax. For the first time in years, the air smelled different, richer, sweeter. Gone was the harsh sting of desert dust and stone. Here, the breeze carried the scent of wet earth, of flowering papyrus, of life. Mena allowed himself to relax. His hands, so used to gripping chisels and hauling ropes, now rested idly on his lap. His shoulders sagged, no longer braced against the strain of labor. And yet, there was an unfamiliar tension, not of the body, but of the mind, a question that lingered just beneath the surface. Who was he, now that he was no longer a builder of the pyramid? The boat passed clusters of small villages. Children played along the banks. splashing water and chasing one another with shrieks of laughter. Fishermen cast their nets, their boats rocking gently as they pulled in silver flashes of tilapia and perch. At one bend in the river, a funeral procession wound its way toward the water, a line of mourners in white linen, carrying baskets of food, jars of oil, and woven mats. A wooden boat waited at the shore, its painted eyes watching the river. The deceased body, wrapped tightly in linen, lay beneath a canopy of reeds. Mena watched silently as the mourners loaded the body and offerings onto the boat. Drummers beat a slow, steady rhythm. Flutes cried soft, mournful notes. As the vessel drifted toward the west bank, the land of the dead, Mena bowed his head briefly. It struck him how closely the rhythm of work, life, and death were tied here. The pyramid itself was, in truth, a tomb, a monument not just to the king, but to the journey between worlds, a bridge from this life to the next. His hands brushed instinctively over the polished stone in his satchel, a piece of the bridge he had helped build. As the boat sailed on, Mena's thoughts drifted to his family. His wife's face, blurred by memory but sharp in feeling. His eldest son, surely grown now, perhaps working the fields or learning the trades. His youngest, whose face he had only seen for a few weeks before leaving for the pyramid all those years ago. Would they recognize him? Would he recognize them? The boatman interrupted his thoughts. "We'll reach Pernefer by midday," he announced, pointing to a cluster of trees in the distance where the river curved sharply. Mena nodded in thanks, gripping the railing a little tighter. Pernefer, his home, the place where he was born, the place where he had once dreamed of leaving to become part of something greater. And now, the place to which he returned, carrying both the weight and the pride of what he had built. As the boat drifted closer, details began to emerge. Mud-brick houses nestled among the reeds, goats wandering between courtyards, women pounding grain beneath shady awnings. Familiar voices floated over the water. The smell of bread baking in clay ovens reached him even here. His heart thumped harder. Hands that had not trembled, even while guiding stones the size of huts now shook ever so slightly. The boatman called out, guiding the vessel toward the dock. Ropes were thrown, tied to worn wooden posts. The boat bumped gently against the shore. Mena stood, adjusting his satchel over his shoulder. His feet felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from something deeper, something harder to name. He stepped onto the dock, onto home, and for the first time in a very long time, Mena exhaled. The dock felt both familiar and strange beneath Mena's feet. The same sun-warmed planks, the same worn posts wrapped with fraying ropes. But his steps were heavier now, his gait slower, not from age alone, but from the years spent walking on stone and sand rather than soft earth and wood. Around him, life unfolded as it always had. A fisherman tugged a net full of shimmering fish from the river. Two children chased a goat through the muddy path that wound between homes. Women knelt by the water's edge, scrubbing linen garments against smooth stones, chatting and laughing as the river carried away the soap and dirt. No one noticed him at first. A man returning home was nothing remarkable in this place where boats came and went, bringing merchants, travelers, and farmers. But as Mena moved further along the path, past the boatyard, past the reed shelters where fish were left to dry, faces began to turn. First a glance, then a second, a pause in conversation. A whisper passed from one mouth to another. "Is that Mena?" It was a baker who spoke first, an old man whose flour-stained hands had shaped bread in this village longer than anyone remembered. He squinted, brushing his hands on his apron. "By the gods!" "Mena, it's you." Mena smiled, raising a hand. "It's me." The baker laughed, loud and full, beckoning others. "It's him. Come see. He's back." Footsteps hurried from houses and workshops. Neighbors appeared, some older, stooped by time, others young, born after Mena had left, hearing only stories of the man who went to build the king's tomb. Children peered from behind their mothers, curious. From the path ahead, someone ran, a woman, her hair streaked with silver, but her face unmistakably hers. Mena's heart caught. "Hen," he breathed. His wife reached him, slowing only in the final steps before colliding into his arms. Her hands pressed to his face. as if to confirm he was truly there. Her eyes brimmed with tears that refused to fall. By all the gods, you're home. He held her tightly, arms wrapping around her smaller frame, breathing her in, the scent of crushed herbs, of sun-warmed skin, of familiarity. I'm home, he whispered, voice breaking. A small voice interrupted. Father, he looked down. A boy, no, not a boy. A young man now, tall, lean, with Hent's eyes and Mena's jaw. His son. Mena swallowed hard. Comet? He asked, as though the name itself were fragile. The young man nodded slowly, uncertain. I think so. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with the awkwardness of men who weren't sure whether they were strangers or family, they stepped forward and embraced. A tight, clumsy, wordless embrace that said everything neither knew how to voice. Laughter and applause broke around them. Neighbors clapped Mena's back, offered welcomes, and threw questions like grains of barley. Is it finished? Is the king pleased? Did you really pull stones bigger than houses? Mena chuckled, shaking his head. Not finished yet, but close. And yes, the stones are as big as the gods themselves. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for another face. Where is... A girl's voice cut through. Father! A smaller figure ran to the crowd, barefoot, her braids bouncing against her shoulders. She was maybe 10. Small, fast, determined. Mena knelt just in time to catch her as she threw herself into his arms. His youngest daughter, born shortly before he left. Her laughter bubbled against his chest. You came back. You really came back. He kissed her hair, closing his eyes tightly. I did. I'm here. For the first time in years, surrounded by voices he knew, faces he remembered, and hands that welcomed him home, Mena felt something he hadn't allowed himself in so long. Rest. The sun climbed higher as the morning unfolded into midday. What began as a quiet arrival had transformed into a small celebration. Neighbors gathered beneath woven canopies stretched between houses, offering Mena food, drink, and endless conversation. Bowls of dates, figs, roasted barley, and fresh bread passed from hand to hand. Clay jugs of sweet beer and palm wine made their rounds, filling cups faster than they could be emptied. Mena sat at the center of it all, his back against the trunk of a large sycamore tree whose shade had cooled this very courtyard since before he was born. His wife, Hent, sat beside him, her hand resting over his, as though afraid he might disappear if she let go. On his other side, Comet, his son, sat tall but reserved, watching his father as though trying to reconcile the stories of the man who had left with the man who now sat before him. His daughter, little Satra, curled against his leg, absently braiding the frayed edges of his robe as she hummed to herself. You've missed the floods, the baker said, handing Mena a bowl of lentils, twice as strong as last year, nearly swept half the northern fields into the river. And the herds grew, added a fisherman. 3 calves born just this month. You'll have work tending them now. Mena smiled, dipping bread into the lentils. Work is life. I wouldn't know what to do without it. The laughter that followed was genuine, but beneath it lay a quiet truth. He wasn't the same man who had left. And they knew it. The way he sat, his back straighter, his hands rougher, his eyes deeper, weighed by sights and years most here would never know. Hent squeezed his hand. The house is ready. Your tools, your space. I kept it just as you left it. His eyes softened. Thank you. I wasn't sure. After so long. She smiled, a little sad, a little proud. It is your home. Always has been. Comet finally broke his silence. Father, his voice caught slightly uncertain. Will you teach me? Mena turned to him, searching his face. Teach you to build, to shape stone, to do what you did. The question struck something deep. For years, Mena had shaped stones for others, for a king, for a monument whose name was not his. The thought of shaping something now, here, with his own son for their family, it stirred a warmth he hadn't expected. He reached out, resting a hand on Comet's shoulder. I will teach you, not the work of kings, but the work of life, how to build walls that stand, homes that endure, fences that hold, how to read the stone and listen to what it says. Comet nodded, his shoulders squaring slightly, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. As the meal wound down, the neighbors slowly dispersed, returning to their tasks. Promises were made. Menna would visit each of them in the coming days, would hear their stories, would share his own. With the courtyard quieting, Menna rose. His legs were stiff, his back sore, but none of it mattered. His family walked beside him, Hent with her hand in his, Comet steady and strong, Saitra skipping ahead, chasing dragonflies through the reeds. The path to their home was short, a worn trail past a fig orchard, through fields of wheat swaying in the breeze. The house stood as he remembered. Mud brick walls, a thatched roof, a low stone fence lining the perimeter. It was smaller than the pyramid, infinitely smaller. And yet, as he stepped through the doorway, letting his fingers trail along the familiar stone frame, it felt bigger than anything he had ever built. This was his monument, his greatest work, his home. Stepping through the doorway, Menna felt an overwhelming wave of familiarity. The scent of the home was exactly as he remembered, a mixture of sun-baked clay, dried herbs hanging from the beams, and the faint sweetness of palm oil used for cooking. The walls were smooth, patched expertly by Hent over the years. The floor was cool beneath his feet, compacted earth worn smooth by decades of footsteps, his own among them. In the corner sat his old workbench. Tools still hung neatly on the wall, wooden mallets, flint scrapers, and copper chisels polished despite their years of disuse. A shallow stone basin where he once mixed plaster and mortar waited patiently, as though expecting him to resume his craft at any moment. His satchel slipped from his shoulder, landing gently on the bench. He opened it carefully, withdrawing the two stones he had carried, one rough, one polished. With deliberate hands, he placed them side by side on the bench. Two worlds, two lives. Comet entered behind him, eyes scanning the room with curiosity. "This is where you worked?" Menna nodded. "Before the pyramid, before the king's tomb, this was my workshop. These walls, these tools, they built everything you see around you." Comet approached the workbench, running his fingers along the edge of a worn chisel. "It feels different, not like the stories." Menna chuckled softly. "The stories speak of greatness. But greatness starts here, with walls that don't fall when the wind comes, with roofs that don't leak in the rains, with hands that know the weight of stone and the patience to shape it." He paused and added, "Come, let me show you." Together, they stepped outside to the small yard behind the house. A low wall bordered the property, separating it from the neighboring fig orchard. Parts of the wall had crumbled over the years. Nothing dramatic, but signs of time's quiet erosion. Menna picked up a fallen brick, turning it over in his hands. "First lesson," he said. "Stone remembers. It remembers poor hands and good ones. Rush it, and it splits wrong. Respect it, and it holds." Comet knelt beside him, watching intently. Menna demonstrated how to mix mud with straw for mortar, his hands moving deftly despite the years away from this task. Together, they reset the fallen stones, smoothing the mortar between them, tapping each one into place until the line was straight and true. Saitra appeared after a few minutes, giggling as she handed them water from a small jar. "You're both dusty already," she teased. Menna laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. Dust is the price of building something that lasts. As the wall took shape, Hent leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching with a smile that was both proud and wistful. Her husband had left as a young man chasing the ambition of kings. Now he returned, not as someone lesser, but as someone different. Someone whose hands no longer belonged to monuments, but to family. By afternoon, the wall was whole again, not perfect. Menna had left a few seams uneven, not out of carelessness, but as a lesson. "Perfection isn't the goal," he told Comet, wiping his hands clean. "Strength is longevity, the ability to stand against time." Comet nodded, absorbing every word. Menna stood, stretching his sore back, looking out over the fields where the wheat swayed like a golden sea. Beyond it, the Nile shimmered, reflecting the late sun. And beyond that, far beyond sight, but never beyond memory, the pyramid stood, a mountain of stone, a testament to years of labor, to hands like his. But here, right here, was his true legacy. He turned to Comet and Saitra, ruffling their hair. "Come, let's wash. There's still daylight left, and life doesn't wait." As the sun dipped lower, casting long amber streaks across the fields, Mena led his children to the small well near the back of their property. The cool water splashed over his hands, washing away the dust and mortar. Comet followed, rolling up his sleeves, while little Saitra squealed at the cold droplets, flicking water at her brother with mischievous delight. Mena cupped water in his hands, splashing it over his face. The sensation was electric, cold, pure, grounding. For so many years, water had been rationed, precious on construction site, measured carefully for workers, for mixing with sand to move stone. But here water flowed freely, generously, as if the earth itself gave it in gratitude. After drying off, they gathered near the hearth. Hen had prepared a simple meal, flatbread, lentil stew, and roasted onions. The smell filled the small home, rich and comforting. As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Comet asked about life on the pyramid. What were the tools like? How did they move stone so big? Was it true that sometimes entire blocks cracked after days of labor? Mena answered each question with patience. Yes, it's true. Sometimes a block would split just as it reached the top of the ramp. And you'd feel it, not just in your hands, but in your chest. The sound of failure is heavier than the stone itself. Saitra leaned forward, wide-eyed. Did you ever fall? He chuckled. Once, but into a pile of sand, not stone. I was lucky. Hent listened, her hand resting gently over his. Her eyes watched him, not as a man returned from labor, but as a husband she'd waited for, as the father her children were rediscovering. As the meal ended, Mena rose, stretching his arms toward the beams of the ceiling. Come, he said softly, motioning them toward the doorway. They stepped outside together, greeted by the glow of twilight. The sky was a canvas of deep orange fading into violet, the first stars blinking awake. From the hill behind their home, they could see the river shimmering in the distance. Boats floated like dark silhouettes against the water. Birds wheeled overhead, settling into nests. Mena pointed toward the west, where the horizon met the desert. Out there, beyond what you can see, stand the pyramid, taller than anything, bigger than any mountain. Comet followed his gaze. Do you miss it? A long silence. Mena let the question linger, let it breathe. Some part of me will always belong to it, he said finally. But it was never meant to be mine. The pyramid belongs to kings, to the gods, to time. This, he gestured to the home, to his family standing beside him, to the earth beneath their feet. This is what belongs to me. Saitra reached up, wrapping her small fingers around his. Comet stood a little straighter, shoulders squared as if inheriting something invisible but profound. They stayed there for a long while, watching as the sky deepened, as stars multiplied, as the sounds of night replaced the hum of day. And in that moment, Mena felt something he had not known in years. Peace. Not the peace of rest between tasks. Not the peace of a job done, but the peace of knowing where he truly belonged. As the cool wind rose from the river and the crickets began their gentle song, Mena turned to his family and smiled. Let's go inside. Tomorrow, there's still more to build. The night embraced the village with a gentle hush, broken only by the soft crackle of the hearth fire and the rhythmic hum of insects beyond the mud brick walls. Inside the house, the family gathered close, their silhouettes flickering in the warm glow of the oil lamp. Mena sat on a woven mat near the wall, running his hands over the familiar texture of the reed fibers beneath him. The simple weight of home wrapped around him like a second skin, comforting, grounding. His gaze drifted to the beam overhead where bundles of herbs hung drying, mint, sage, and papyrus flowers. Their faint fragrance mingled with the scent of burning oil and warm clay. Comet sat opposite him, sharpening a wooden handle for a tool. His hands were steady but inexperienced, every movement carrying the caution of someone eager to learn but still unsure. Mena watched him silently, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. Careful with the grain, Mena advised softly, work against it and it'll splinter. Let the wood tell you, where it wants to be shaped. Comet adjusted his grip, nodding, his brow furrowed in concentration. Beside them, Satra lay curled up with her head resting on Hent's lap, fingers lazily tracing patterns in the fabric of her mother's robe. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she fought it, unwilling to surrender the precious hours of being close to her father. "Tell us a story," she murmured, voice muffled. Mena chuckled quietly. "A story? Yes, from when you were building the pyramid." He leaned back against the cool mud brick wall, closed his eyes briefly, gathering the threads of memory. There was a day when the sky opened. Comet's eyes flicked up, attentive. Hent smiled, stroking Satra's hair. The wind came without warning. Mena began, his voice low and rhythmic. Sand darkened the sky. It howled through the scaffolds, tore ropes from hands, snapped wooden beams. Stones heavier than any man, shuddered, threatening to fall. Satra gasped softly. But we didn't run. We couldn't. If we left the ramp, the block would slide and crush everything below. So we pressed into the stone, wrapped arms around the ropes, leaned against the wind like trees in a storm. His hand mimicked the motion, fingers curling around an invisible rope. The sand stung. It filled our mouths, our eyes. We couldn't see, couldn't breathe, but we held. One heartbeat, then another, until the wind broke. The sky cleared, and there, standing, was the block, right where it needed to be. Comet let out a long breath. "You stayed, even with the wind?" "We all did, because the pyramid wasn't built by one man, or 10, or 100. It was built by thousands, each one holding, pulling, carving, lifting together. Silence settled after that. Thick, comforting. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from fullness, from stories shared, from lessons passed, from the simple presence of those you love. Satra's breathing deepened into sleep, her small hand limp against Hent's robe. Comet set his tool down, leaning back, gaze distant but thoughtful. Hent met Mena's eyes, and in that look was everything. Years apart, years waiting, years now reclaimed. Mena shifted slightly, letting his head rest back against the wall. His eyelids grew heavy, but he didn't fight it. For the first time in years, sleep would come not as an escape from toil, but as a welcome guest. And as the fire burned low, casting soft shadows over the home, Mena's last thoughts were simple. Tomorrow, there is more to build. But for tonight, this is enough. The first pale light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the wooden shutters, painting thin golden lines across the mud brick walls. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew on wheat fields and the earthy breath of the Nile. Roosters crowed in the distance, joined by the soft lowing of goats and the rhythmic thump of millstones turning grain. Mena stirred before the others, his body waking as it always had. Early, instinctively, shaped by years of labor beneath the rising sun. But this morning felt different. Not driven by duty to a king or the relentless pull of the scaffold, but by something gentler, something simpler. He rose quietly, stepping over the still sleeping forms of Satra, curled beneath her linen blanket, and Comet, who had fallen asleep near the hearth, tools still scattered around him. Hent lay turned toward the wall, her breathing soft, her face peaceful. Outside, the village was already beginning to stir. Farmers led oxen toward the fields, their bare feet leaving temporary prints in the damp earth. Women gathered near the well, filling clay jars, their laughter mingling with the splash of water. Children chased one another between reed fences, their giggles floating into the morning air. Mena walked slowly toward the edge of the field behind his home. The wheat stood tall, rustling softly in the breeze like a sea of gold. He let his hands drift over the heads of grain as he passed, fingertips brushing against the soft kernels. At the far end of the property stood an old acacia tree, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky. Beneath it lay a pile of stones, some fallen from an old fence, others gathered over the years but never placed. They waited, patient, for hands to give them purpose. Mena knelt beside the pile, selecting one, smooth on one side, fractured on the other. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight, the texture, the story it carried. And in that moment, he understood the pyramid was never about the king. It was never about immortality carved in stone. It was about the act of building, of shaping something that endures, not for glory, not for history, but for the simple, profound purpose of protecting what matters, of sheltering those you love, of leaving behind something stronger than yourself. Comet's voice called from behind, drowsy but curious. "Father?" Mena turned, offering a small smile. "Come here, son." Comet jogged over, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What are you doing?" "Choosing stones," Mena said. Holding one up, "We're building today." Comet knelt beside him, mimicking his father's movements, picking through the pile. "For what?" Mena pointed to the edge of the field, where the fence had collapsed during last year's flood. "We'll rebuild the wall. Stronger this time. Higher. So the goats stay where they belong and the wheat stays safe." Comet nodded, setting to work without further question. His hands were clumsy at first, stones set unevenly, lines crooked, but Mena corrected him gently, guiding his fingers, adjusting the angles. "Feel the weight," he instructed. "Not just with your hands, but here." He tapped his own chest. "The stone will tell you where it belongs." Together, they worked in rhythm. No chants, no overseers, no drums of labor. Just a steady, grounding cadence of father and son, placing one stone after another beneath the rising sun. From the house, Hent watched from the doorway, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Sacher stood beside her, arms wrapped around her mother's waist, eyes wide with curiosity. And as the wall slowly rose, stone by stone, Mena realized that this was the most important monument he would ever build. Not one that reached the sky, but one that held the earth together. For them, the sun had climbed high, casting shimmering waves of heat across the golden fields. Sweat trickled down Mena's temples as he carefully adjusted the last stone into place. Beside him, Comet wiped his brow, his hands dusted white with powdered limestone, his fingers already showing beginnings of calluses. Marks of someone who shapes the world, not with words, but with hands. Mena leaned back, studying the newly rebuilt wall. Straight, solid, not grand, not magnificent, but enduring, dependable. It would hold through the rains, the winds, and the years to come. And that was enough. A gentle breeze swept over the wheat, sending ripples through the stalks like waves on the Nile. Birds wheeled above, calling to one another in the bright sky. From a house, the smell of baking bread drifted toward them, carried by the wind, warm, rich, grounding. Mena stood slowly, stretching his back, the familiar ache present but welcomed. It was a reminder that his body still belonged to the rhythm of work, to the honest exchange of effort for a purpose. "You did good work today," he said, clapping Comet's shoulder. Comet smiled, a mixture of pride and fatigue. "I learned from the best." Mena chuckled softly. "You'll learn the rest soon enough. The stones will teach you more than I ever can." As they walked back toward the house, Sacher sprinted toward them, her small feet kicking up dust. "Mother says the bread's ready," she called, her braids bouncing. Together, they crossed the yard, passing beneath the shade of the old acacia tree. Mena glanced once more toward the horizon. Far beyond sight, hidden by distance and time, the Great Pyramid rose. He could not see it, but he felt it, not as a place he left behind, but as a chapter written, closed, and honored. His hands brushed the stones of the house as he passed through the doorway. These were his monuments now, not made for kings, not for gods, but for family, for love, for life. As the afternoon wore on, laughter filled the small home, the clatter of plates, the shuffle of footsteps, the quiet hum of stories shared. And as the sun began its slow descent toward the western hills, Mena sat beneath the sycamore tree, watching his children chase each other through the wheat, their laughter rising like music. In that moment, he understood something simple and profound. The pyramid was never the greatest thing he had built. This was, this life, this family, this home. As the last light of the day kissed the earth, Mena closed his eyes and smiled, whispering into wind, "I am home." As the Nile whispers through the night and the stars rise quietly above, our story comes to an end. But your journey doesn't have to stop here. If you enjoyed traveling back in time, exploring the simple, beautiful moments of life in ancient Egypt, there's another story waiting for you. Tap the next video right here on the screen and let yourself drift into a new world, a new story, a new night. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss another peaceful journey into the past. Thank you for being here. Sleep well. See you in the next story.